Fantastic Mr. Fox movie review. So this is a Wes Anderson movie. It's a children's movie, but it's also full of the typical Wes Anderson type humor. In fact, I saw this movie on a friend's recommendation. He had seen it because he was out with his family. It was a family outing and they were out with their young nieces and nephews. And so they were all going to the theater to see a family film, and they saw this, and it was an animated film, and he had been expecting, kind of a typical dumb children's talking animal film. And then found it so funny, all the quirky humor in there, that he told me all about it, and then I rented it on his recommendation. Although both of us had seen Wes Anderson films before, I've said previously of Wes Anderson films that I do enjoy the humor, but I sometimes get bogged down in the movie, that the pacing seems a little bit slow. That was largely not a problem in this movie. And maybe because it was a little bit shorter at only 87 minutes, or maybe again because it was kind of a children's film, so maybe the pace was picked up a little bit. That being said, there were one or two moments where I thought the pacing did get a little bit slow. I mean, it wasn't terrible, just one or two moments. That last scene at the end, for example, seemed to go on a few beats too long. It's also typical of Wes Anderson films, at least for me, that I find them funnier after I finished watching it. So while I'm watching the film, I'll chuckle a few times maybe. But then after I'm done watching it, the next day or two, while I'm thinking about the film, thinking about some of these scenes seem funnier and funnier the longer I think about them. So a couple of things in here. This typically happens with me with every Wes Anderson film. But the newspaper column that Mr. Fox writes, and he's always complaining that his friends don't read it. Excuse me. Didn't get a chuckle out of me while I was watching the movie, but the next couple of days after I saw it, thinking about it, it did seem pretty funny. Or Mr. Fox making a record of his chicken stealing plans, just because he keeps records of everything. That struck me as pretty funny. Or pretty much anything Bill Murray says. Bill Murray, by the way, has become one of my favorite actors because of Wes Anderson. I always liked him well enough. He was huge in the 80s when I was a kid, and I liked him well enough. But I didn't truly appreciate how great his comic potential is until he got paired with Wes Anderson. I suspect there are a lot of people like that, and I hope they continue to do many more great work in the future. Aside from the story about the animals, and aside from the animation, there seems to be very little to mark this as a children's movie. Wes Anderson's unique brand of humor doesn't seem to have been dumbed down at all for the children. They haven't made the punchlines any easier to grasp. You would have thought that the studio would have insisted on more slapstick or more obvious punchline humor to make this film more marketable to children, but interestingly enough, apparently they didn't. Apparently they let Wes Anderson just do what he wanted to do. Actually, the one concession that Wes Anderson seems to have made for the children's market is that all the cuss words are replaced by the word cuss. As in, he's a cuss of a lot bigger, or what the cuss are you talking about, etc. This becomes a bit of humor in and of itself, with the word cuss popping up in all sorts of situations. It's the usual Wes Anderson ironic humor, of course, but if you like that thing, it's on full display here. It's also brilliant satire on the American tendency to assign moral values to phonemic utterances. When you substitute one semantically meaningless word for another semantically meaningless word, does that make it less morally bad? It obviously confused the MPAA ratings board. They ended up settling on giving this film a PG rating for what they called slang humor. My only big complaint with this film: I wish they would have gotten younger voice actors to play the parts of the adolescents in this film. Their voices, I think, come off sounding as way too adult, and it takes me out of the film a bit. Other than that, this film is brilliantly done.